I'm Kevin O'Hara for alcoholmastery.com, and today I'm going to talk about another one of the reasons to quit drinking. That's to regain and rebuild your trust. Now, trust is at the core of all human relationships. Without trust, there's no glue that just holds these relationships together as partners, families, friendships, as communities. And Stephen Covey, he says that trust is the most essential ingredient in effective communication. It's the foundational principles that hold relationships together. Now, when I used to drink, I just lost a lot of trust in myself. Sometimes when I was drinking, I didn't know what I was doing. I couldn't remember some of the basic stuff about the night before, conversations, coming home, going to bed. You know, I'm sure you all know something about that. You know, sometimes I wake up with a knot in the pit of my stomach that told me I'd screwed up royally the night before, and you know, I'd really have to face some serious consequences now that I was sober the next morning. Now, how can you trust yourself when you can't trust your memory? At other times, I didn't care what I was doing. In those moments, I couldn't trust my brain to judge the appropriateness of anything that I did. You know, normally, I've got a really good gauge between my brain and my mouth, but when I was drunk, that just melted into the fog. It was like I had sort of a loudspeaker attached to my thoughts. So no sooner had something appeared in my brain that it would actually come out into reality. You know, these times, the only filters to what I was saying were my ears, which were, you know, it's far too late for pulling back some offensive comment or some sarcastic put down that you've just given to somebody, you know. Now, there's also like cringing moments when even your sort of ears and everything else is oblivious to the verbal diarrhea that's coming out. You know, those were the times when I'd wake up the next morning with sort of enough sense to know that there was something wrong, but I couldn't focus in on it. I couldn't remember what had happened. So the only sure thing was, like I said, the knot in my stomach. My stomach was telling me that there was, you know, something that I had done that I shouldn't be proud of. You know, you must understand this. You know, everyone's gone through, everyone who's a drinker has gone through this kind of stuff, you know, blabbed about somebody has spoken ill about them, or you know, said something that you weren't supposed to say. You know, I remember a few years ago, before I stopped, and we went out with a few of my mates, nice summer's evening, went into a local bar, and we started out with a few beers and ended up in the small hours of the morning, you know, and the next morning. Got up the next morning, all thoughts of alcohol got out of my head, and the following afternoon, met up with my buddies as well, the ones that were with me the night before, to have the cure. And we just got into the bar and just sat down. Before I could order a pint, you know, one of the barmaids came over to me and said she wanted to see me outside, you know. So she said to me that she'd overheard me talking about her the night before. Now, I didn't remember a thing. I had apparently been taking the piss out of the way she'd spoke, and I was doing these stupid impressions of her voice and some of her mannerisms. And she was really upset and hurt. I could see it in her face. And she told me that she'd been genuinely shocked by what she'd heard, that she didn't think I was capable of that. And I was genuinely mortified. You know, I didn't know where to put my face. It was all I could do to just stay there in front of her and sort of apologize. And I mean, what can you say when you do something like that? I just said I didn't remember, and I was sorry. It was all meaningless. Whatever I said to her, I couldn't sort of apologize enough. But she was somebody that always had time for the regulars. She always had a smile on her face, plenty of banter, looked after us. And although she sort of accepted my apology, I knew that I'd lost something in that woman. That's just not who I am. It's not how I go about my life. You know, how many times have my drunken Mr. Hyde started insulting somebody, been dishonest, uncaring, heartless, callous, crass? You know, how many times had I done that to somebody that hadn't challenged me for the insult the next day? You know, another area of my life that I butchered a lot, butchered a lot of my credulity was with my son. I mean, trust from The innocent, like a young lad, is given in abundance, is given openly, and it's given without question. A child trusts their parent implicitly. To a young child, the parent is God, what you say is gospel, and you can do very little wrong. Now, I think it's an inescapable and agonizing truth that parents have got to face, that, one after the other, they've got to sort of break small little bonds of trust that they've got with the children. We have to hide some truths to protect them. Their developing minds, they're not capable of understanding some of what goes on. So we sugarcoat some realities. It's a natural thing to do, but as our children mature and inevitably face how things are in the real world, now much of that implicit trust is going to be eroded, because we have to let go and we have to let life take its course. Now, in hindsight, one of my most cruel breaches of that just elementary trust was sending my son out into the world with this delusion that alcohol is anything but a deadly drug. That is, to my enduring shame. Of course, in hindsight, it's 2020. If I'd known what I was doing, I wouldn't have done it, right? I've always tried to lead by example. I've always tried to be a good dad. But when you don't understand the example that you're giving, when you don't understand it yourself, you tend to lead people down the same dark fucking alley that you've taken yourself. Martin Luther King said that nothing in the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. Now, trust was something that I took completely for granted until I stopped drinking, until I didn't use alcohol anymore. I never fully realized or appreciated just how much my drinking affected the levels of trust that others gave to me. Now, it hit me hard one day, a couple of months after I'd stopped drinking, actually. My sister asked me if I'd mind going around and babysitting my 3 lovely nieces. At the time, she only had 3. Now, of course, I was delighted to do it. And then I realized that it was the first time that she'd asked me, without a drop of alcohol in my system, without my brain being fogged up by this toxic habit, and getting into this, version of reality, I could sort of understand why she hadn't asked me to look after her children before. It was totally obvious. I didn't get the trust because I was untrustworthy. I remember thinking that if I was untrustworthy for this, how many other things did my family and friends not trust me with? This was sort of a wake-up call to another negative aspect that my life had been like as a drinker. Another cautionary warning about never going down into that harmful lifestyle again. There's an aspect of positivity to this that lifted my spirits and sort of just solidified my determination to keep going. And that was being asked to babysit was just a massive sign that I was rebuilding that trust, that I'd gone from being the drunk of the family to being the person who could be trusted to take care of these 3 young children, even if it was only for a couple of hours. Now, with a level head, not fueled or dulled by alcohol, it's much easier to be the person that you want to be. Self-respect is built around being able to trust yourself and being trusted by others. So here's some questions to ask yourself. Where in your life do you take trust for granted? Where in your life have you sort of lost the trust because of your drinking? Whose trust would you like to get back? Whose trust would you like to regain? So that's it for this video. If you have a second, I'd really appreciate you clicking the like button below. And thank you for watching. I'm Kevin O'Hara for Alcohol Mastery. Until next time, onwards and upwards.